So why don't we start with how and when did you get involved with Russia? What got you involved?
So I guess I have to say that the first thing you should understand is that I started at Arthur Young in 1977 and moved. I was associate general counsel, and they hired me because I had been involved in a lot of in just a few years at Chadbourne Park. I had been involved in a lot of special investigations, including the United Brands investigate, not United Fruit investigation, where the guy jumped off the Pan Am building.
Uh-huh.
And I came to the attention of Arthur Young, who were the auditors, and they asked me to come and because they had a number of global, I'll call them sensitive payment reviews, and so I agreed to do it. And throughout my career at Arthur Young and Ernst and Young, when there were major, I'll say, investigations or forensic things, no matter what my job was, they asked me to be involved or run them. Um, and so I was involved in going all around the world and doing these special investigations. This one that they hired me for took me to Iran, Saudi, all around the world, and involved interfacing with the Justice Department, the SEC, the RCMP, and I did the oil for food investigation. I did the E.F. Hutton review. I did the Swiss insurance and bank companies seizure of genocide victims. And I ran the part of it as well that distributed the money to the heirs of
Right.
those poor people. And so this kind of morphed my career into a global role. And
Hmm.
we did the merger between Arthur Young and Ernst and Whinney in 1989. I was involved in doing that deal, and kind of as a reward, I became the vice chairman of the U.S. firm. And I requested the chairman, I said, I think my future should be global. And he hesitated, but I got involved as a result of that request in being one of the three or four US partners working with three or four UK partners in starting all the practices in Eastern Europe, the CIS, and Russia.
Uh-huh. And when was that group formed?
1990.
1990. Okay.
And we had one guy, Richard Lewis, who's now passed. He was quite a character, a British tax guy, very esoteric and one of a kind human being. And we set him up at that time in an apartment on Prospect Mirror.
Uh-huh.
And he was employee number 001. Um, and so I was involved in the US and UK firms, financed it all. We formed something called Ernst and Young Eastern Europe
Hmm.
that we used as a vehicle. It was an Isle of Man entity. All the wrong things. We did all the wrong things. And we tried to find, because you needed to have the law at the time required that you had joint ventures, remember? And
Right.
so we found a joint venture with let's call him consultant, using
Yeah.
the term loosely. His name was Alex Rupstoff. And his greatest claim to fame, I think, was having an affair with, I shouldn't say this, with Yeltsin's daughter, Yelena.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
But he had access, and so he became a joint venture partner. This is a year or so down the road from the
Right.
very beginning, and we found a guy named Oleg Valerius, who we called an audit partner, but he wouldn't know an audit from a beehive because
Yeah.
there were no such things.
Right.
They had no reason to tax anybody because there was no income, right?
Right. Right.
So
Right.
so um so I got involved because
Can I
great.
just
Yeah, go
stop
ahead.
at one question? When you started this, who did you expect your customers to? Who were your clients or
It was obviously at the time that we were dealing with our American Expresses and mobile, and people who were going there and would need services, because we were serving them in, at the time, I guess in 1990 we had 140 countries, 700
right?
offices. And so we were serving worldwide clients in the Philippines and China, and trying to figure out how to
Right.
serve them in Vietnam or Libya as well, which were problems. And Russia became, and Poland, all these places, not just Russia, but all of them became places where we needed to serve our global client base. And that was the initial thought.
Okay.
Um,
And so at that point, you didn't have any expertise in Russia as a country,
None.
but you understood the needs of the global clients. So you were in some ways the blind leading the blind in the Russian territory.
And I had also had this unique experience in unfucking fucked up situations in Indonesia, where we had to decide whether our partner should go to jail or whatever. And in Turkey, where I was sent in to these situations to try and figure out about fraud, not just our own people, but clients, where we need to decide, how do we deal with this terrible situation?
Right. Right.
And that was kind of an outstanding primer, if you will,
Uh-huh.
for just emerging markets, which this, of course, was.
Yeah.
And it was really because I raised my hand and I said, I think the future is in globalization, and I'd like to, my next thing in the firm, I'd like to be global.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
so in 1993, they kind of formalized this for me and made me global counsel. And I actually started going to Russia. I can't remember whether it was 92 or 93 that I first went. And I first went because um, the general counsel and the CEO of Ernst and Young Global, a guy named Mike Henning, were concerned about how the operation in Russia was being run. And because of my expertise in forensics, they said, you go and you
Right.
figure out what you guys did. How's it going?
Right.
And I went and found out it wasn't going so well. It wasn't going so well in Czech Republic. It wasn't going so well in Russia. And in a number of these situations, the guys we sent had gone native, I'll say, and
Okay.
and began to do squirrely things with locals. Um, so in the Czech Republic, we found out that the Brit, had got involved with one of the local quote partners in buying a property to lease it back to the firm. Not something we tolerate.
Uh-huh.
And I
Right.
found even worse things in Russia.
Mm-hmm.
And so we replace, so this, I don't want to mention his name. We replaced the managing partner.
Right.
We understood we needed to control Alex, because he didn't know how to do a deal without a bribe.
Yeah.
And so in Ernst and Young, when you go and you find a mess and you're in a position of responsibility, you're then in charge, right? So it was like,
Okay.
okay, now you fix this kind of thing, which is, kind of the way it should be, right? You
Yeah.
you
Yeah. Yeah.
you found it, you fix it.
Right.
So for the next few years, I spent most of my time in Russia. You know, living in a place called Chaika. We had rented about a dozen, I'll call them dachas, but they were, some of them were old cottages. It was a party, Communist Party, upper echelon area with metal walls and, that kind of thing.
Okay. So like a compound.
It
Oh,
was a compound.
yeah. Okay.
But
Yeah.
they were houses, and
Right.
there was like a I'm going to say, a central building that had facilities in it. And a number of the partners who were expats were living there, and I had a place there, shared it.
Yeah.
And in 1994, with a guy named Mike Henning, who I mentioned earlier,
Right.
we decided that we should name a really pure person as the country managing partner. And we picked a guy named Carl Johansson,
Hmm.
who had been a tax partner in the Minneapolis office. And because of the merger, he didn't get the job as office managing partner. And this was kind of a consolation prize. We didn't understand how big it would become, but
Right.
we asked him to move to Russia and assume the job of the guy who we let go.
And so what was important to you was not Russian knowledge or Russian language. It was integrity and knowledge of your firm's procedures and your belief that the people would stick to them once they were in an environment that did everything to pull them in different directions. Is that fair?
Exactly. He was unimpeachable.
Yeah.
He
Yeah.
was incorruptible.
Yeah.
Um, and we were right. And he was there on and off till, I don't know, 2020, 2018.
Wow.
So his name was Carl with a K, Johansson,
Okay.
and he was outstanding as a person who could be trusted. Very, interesting character. And he moved there in 1994, early 95, and took over, which relieved me. Um, and um, and throughout my career in EY, from the time I began until I left after 30 years in 2007, the CIS practice reported directly to me. I became the global executive partner in 1995.
Okay.
In 1997, with the newly named global CEO, a guy named Bill Kimsey, we decided we needed to globally integrate Ernst & Young in order to ensure quality everywhere. You can't do it unless you control the P&Ls.
Hmm.
And we decided we couldn't do that from the US, so we moved the global headquarters to London. And my family and I moved to London in 1997. And in 2003, I became the global COO as well. And so from 1995 to 2007, the Russian practice of EY reported to me. And that meant that I was having to be there all the time
Right.
because it wasn't a place. It was like having a cash business in Brooklyn, not something,
Uh-huh.
not something you can, you know, totally delegate and forget about. There were
Right.
always issues that you had to just get on a plane and go. And so I wound up spending more time going there than Singapore, for example.
Right. So
Um,
let me ask you about this a little more. So your clients were multinationals to begin with, who were going into Russia. And so when you talk about issues, those are issues that arose from what the multinationals were doing, what your staff was doing, what Russian clients were doing. Where were I mean, without, I'm not asking you to name names or anything, but sort of could you describe what you mean by problems and
sure,
where they
sure,
arose? Yeah.
sure. So we, so you go because Columbus goes, and
Mhm.
you set up a sail service place in the Dominican Republic for his boats, right?
Right.
But pretty quickly you realize you have to find sails and wood and stuff, and you get involved in the local economy, and that's what happened. We went there originally to serve. Well, we got this huge project, Tengiz, Conoco,
Uh,
down in the Eurasian area,
Kazakhstan.
Kazakhstan.
Right.
And that was one of our earliest projects. We got two guys who were U.S. partners, Ben Miller and, oh my God, oh, I can see him, but I can't remember his name. I'll remember it and I'll tell you. But we
Yeah.
sent these, one from Dallas. One had been a former Anderson partner, both oil and gas guys, and they spent their time between Dean Ridenauer, and they spent their time between Russia and Kazakhstan. Well, that meant we needed a place in Kazakhstan. Well, a bit beyond our control, had been hired by the original guy. Um, Instead of finding like flats, rented a villa on a hill. It became a real estate issue that
Uh,
became, and it sounds like a minor thing, but there, everything you did entered you into the local economy and created issues. So we moved obviously pretty quickly, as another example, from this apartment and a few other places, by the way,
uh-huh.
um, to a building on Podsosinski Periulok in 1992. And we were renting the building. And actually, the other half of the building was a Moscow University, a brand new thing founded by two Russians and Soros money. And we split the building with them. This couple owned the building, whatever that meant, in 1992.
92, right?
And so one of the problems I had to straighten out first was, what the hell is a lease of a building that nobody really owns in
Right,
a communist country?
right,
And so you guys better invent some real estate law, you
right.
guys better invent some tax law. You guys, so then we decided we wanted to buy half of that building. And so then I had all these problems in like 96, 97 about how do you actually buy a building?
Right,
With it,
right.
where's the deed? Well, we didn't have deeds, right?
Yes, right. How
So
do you do the
so
title search? Yes.
right. And then so those are just mundane examples of day-to-day operating things that are, how you run a business. But then in 1998, we had the crisis. Well, that presented issues around, what do you do with all these brilliant people who you hired? And you now have a crisis, and the revenue stream has changed. So there was a crisis where Carl and I were taking these young Russians and sending them out to San Francisco or Chicago or London. And a lot of them never went back. A
Uh-huh.
guy named Rick Bobrow, not Rick Barbro, his name is Bob Roth.
Hmm.
He may still be a partner in San Francisco, right? They were bright people. They were thirsty to learn. They were amazing young people with no
Right,
accounting background. So they came, we trained them. There was no such thing as an accountant in Russia. So we
right,
had to send them to London or the US to get an accounting certification, right? Because
right,
there was no professional standard.
right,
So all of these issues were how you have a place to work, how you get people, how you treat people. And also on the client side, well, we did, I think one of the first IPOs was Beeline, right? The phone
yeah,
company.
yeah.
I had to be involved with that, of course. Somebody had to make sure that that was really up to snuff. And
Hmm.
so we quickly morphed from serving American Express and Conoco and, the big giants. McDonald's was a client. A lot of big companies were our clients. So we morphed with them. So, McDonald's went to sell hamburgers. Well, eventually they figured out we may better make the buns here, right? I
Hmm.
mean, and so that creates an entire supply chain.
Right.
And eventually some local dude owns a bun factory, right? And
Yeah,
so the practice pretty quickly morphed. And consultants, of course, want jobs. Where are the jobs in Russia? The jobs in Russia are not just with American Express, they're with everybody there.
right,
So the practice more and more morphed from making sure that American Express was happy and comfortable to serving new Russian entities that were springing up. And we grew a huge business, with a number of the oligarchs, with a number of others in Russia. So
Mhm.
that was the evolution. And
Yeah.
because it was Russia and it was so, I'm going to use the word screwed up, Wild West, whatever, from
Right.
92 to 2000, let's say, um, it required tremendous attention and oversight because we, as Ernst and Young, we had enough problems with the S&L crisis, with this, with that. You just couldn't afford the black eyes. We got black eyes, but
Hmm.
you try to minimize it. So it takes extreme, I'll say, special review would be the way I would say it in terms of overseeing a practice. I didn't have to do
Uh-huh.
that for the UK practice,
Right.
right?
Right. Right.
So that's too many words, but that's the
No,
answer.
no, but that's important. It is you had to do due diligence on everything, always.
Everything always.
Yeah, yeah. Okay. And as you grew by hiring young Russians. Is that correct?
Absolutely.
Yeah. And where'd you find them?
They
University?
found us.
They found you.
I
Okay.
mean, it was a thing. There's a book by a guy you know named Charles Hecker,
Sure.
Zero Sum.
Right.
I think if you and I was quoted in there a bunch, and I mean, there were so many smart young people, and they all understood that getting a job with a Western company was a cliche,
Hmm.
and it afforded opportunity and upward growth for them. And so we virtually were a magnet where they were constantly seeking opportunity. And we, as we grew, we quickly understood how bright these people were. And it was hilarious in some ways. You know,
Mm.
I mean, we would run. I was for a time between 1985 and 1990. I was in charge of HR for Ernst and Young. I moved out of legal because I wanted some growth. And in the U.S., we had a kind of an academy in Virginia, and then after the merger, two of them, one there and one in Cleveland. But we did a lot of on-site study for particular levels. Like you make senior, you go somewhere for a week or so, or two
Hmm.
weeks. You make manager, you go somewhere to be trained. Well, we tried to replicate that going somewhere thing in Russia, and it was hilarious. Because if you take a bunch of young Russians in 1994 or 1995 to, like 15 kilometers or 20 kilometers outside of Russia to a quote resort to try to
Right.
do training, it was, if I can use the word clusterfuck, and I mean that in reality as well as alliteratively, it
Right.
was trying to control them was impossible, but
Yeah.
hilarious. I mean, the stories are amazing. If I could tell off-color stories, we had this square stairway that went up 3 stories, and then we added a story, and it went up right in the huge central ornate hall of the entry of this wonderful old building. And we noticed, everybody smoked, and they were all smoking at the bottom of the stairs, the guys. And
Right.
there was a rack right there for the Moscow Times, right there. So
Uh-huh.
it was like a hub of this growing office.
Uh-huh.
And we understood eventually that the guys were all standing there because none of the women were wearing underwear, and they were staring up the girls' skirts. So Carl had to write a memo as delicately as he could, asking women to wear underpants.
Wow.
I mean, this could only happen in Russia. It was just amazing.
Yeah.
But yeah, so these wonderful young people were bright. They didn't have accounting degrees. There was no such thing. But they had intelligence and education and interest. And so we trained them, and they became, Magnitsky started with us,
Uh-huh.
right?
Yeah.
As a
Yeah.
young tax guy before he moved out, I mean, so he's an example of the kind of extraordinary young talent that just wanted the chance to join a firm like not just EY, but all these growing professional institutions and companies.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
And so we had a huge number of expats. And around, I'm going to say 2002, we understood we needed to, we went through this thing in Vietnam, Vietnamization, where we try,
Mhm.
if you remember with that,
I do.
right?
Yes.
I lived through that. And so we understood that we needed to do the equivalent in business in Russia of really uplifting the Russians to be the future and moving the expats out. And we'd be even now there are a couple of old expats still around, but really we Russified the practice. It took 10 or 12 years to really get it there,
Yeah.
but we did it. So it was an amazing thing. That is one of that it may be the most amazing aspect of this was the talent uplifting and the transfer of knowledge and technology of how to run a business, how to be an accountant, how to be a tax person, how to be a consultant, how to be
Right.
all these things. It may
Right.
be the greatest thing we did.
Yeah. Uh-huh. And when would you say you began noticing the impact of that? I'm asking this because other people have pointed to 1998 and the crisis and the exodus of expats at that time, and then that companies discovered they didn't need the expats, and they could survive using Russians, and that it began to be a different character of things around 1998. But that I'm not sure you're seeing it the same way.
I'm not, and for
Okay.
a very specific reason. So in terms of recognizing the level of talent and the
Yeah.
potential, immediately,
Yeah. Okay.
immediately. The problem in our case was we weren't building widgets or lifting gas and oil out of the ground and trying to create so accounting and auditing um, are not a cookie making exercise. And there are issues in a place like Russia, particularly as you take on more local business. The corruption is still existent, and the I never saw a deal in all my time in Russia go in a straight line,
Okay.
and therefore getting. I'm not sure the culture is there now fully. And we had, when did the accounting profession begin? It began really when corporations started to be something. So let's say the 1850s, the birth of something, the progeny of accounting, maybe. And then by 1900, let's say we had real accountants, real accountants and real firms.
Uh-huh.
And by 2000, the technology and the level of you think about the S&L crisis, think about the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, think about all of these legislations trying to prohibit Ponzi from doing his work.
Uh-huh.
In a place like Russia, it's I hate to say this, but what do investors want? They want good corporate governance, they want transparency, rule of law, a level playing field, stability, and diminishment of corruption.
Hmm.
Well, none of that stuff existed. And it's
Right.
not just something, even now, if you read the Russian corporate governance standards, they're pretty damn good.
Hmm.
They just don't mean anything in real life.
Hmm.
So even now, I was there, I can tell you, the first thing that goes out the door is governance in a crisis. Well,
Hmm.
that's good for, it's good for good times, but we don't have time for that shit now. We have to run this business.
Hmm.
And unfortunately, it's easy to train people on how to book a lease versus a sale. it's a lot harder to imbue them with the sense of smell and how to truly make the tough decisions on something where you have to call the ball and say, you're fired, client, or no, we're not doing that.
Hmm.
And so, unless you have enough of that senior talent who are on the firing line and can smell the smoke, you risk your global reputation. And so, even up until I'm going to say Sasha Ivlev became the country managing partner in about 2020. Before that, it was, it was this guy we fired, then it was Carl, then it was, when we had a guy named Steve Moosbrugger from about 2000 to 2002. Carl came to work with me. Then I sent him to be our guy in China. Then we did this merger with Anderson. We got Hans Joachim Horn. He and I didn't see eye to eye. So he left. We put a local in charge who was an Anderson guy. That didn't work out. And I called Carl in like 2004. And I was on my way from Domodedovo to our office, and which was then, over by Paveletskaya because we had moved after the merger. And I said, Carl, I need you to come back. He said, when? I said, tomorrow. And he did.
Uh-huh.
And then he was there till about, I'm going to say 2014, 2015. Then we had a guy named Joe Watt, and then Sasha.
Uh-huh.
So for us, there were a number of Western partners from France, the UK, the US, Germany, Australia, people like that. The number got smaller
Hmm.
as the trust grew that the Russians were getting the sense of, I'll say, right and wrong, smelling the smoke, making the right calls.
Right.
But I would say because of the special needs of being a police force, you know, for fraud and integrity, it was a very special place in our view. And
Hmm.
I think in all of the big four's view, quite honestly, that
Yeah,
the transition to just letting go and turning over was a lot slower than in the oil and gas or manufacturing or consumer product space for special reasons.
I see. Interesting, interesting. And so you were the intermediaries between the sort of Western standards and Russian realities, or if you will.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
And did you see yourself over time sort of changing those Russian realities? Was that part of your mission? I know you work for clients, but um, did you have that sense of a societal transition that you were involved with, or was that just not part of your thinking?
Very philosophical question. I think because the big eight, the big four, Ernst and Young is in 140 countries. Now it's 250,000 people. No, now it's more. Now it's, I left, it was 225. We were 22 billion in revenues when I left in 2007. Now, I just went to a partner meeting in Florida. Um, and, probably 300 and something thousand,
Employees. Yeah.
revenues much higher.
Yeah.
And when you look at EY, the big tent includes, Francophone Africa. It includes Nigeria. It includes Germany, Switzerland, Italy, South America. It is a conglomeration of cultures.
Hmm.
And I think we see ourselves as a big tent that doesn't try to change cultures, but tries to provide seamless, high quality service worldwide, which means that you can keep your culture and your religion, but the religion you have to have in your work is seamless quality in conformity with the standards that apply. And
Hmm.
within that realm, there's room for all kinds of culture, unless your culture is contrary to seamless quality service worldwide. And seamless
Hmm.
quality service includes no corruption, no stink. And I would say we are where we are today in Russia because we never quite got there.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. But you expected to?
I thought, when I got there, so I was a Marine. When I first got there and I stood in Red Square on a cold morning in March, um, and I saw the rebar sticking out at Dynamo on the way down, I thought my government had lied to me. I thought I could smell hope in the air.
Uh-huh.
The women were beautiful. The people were smart. I didn't feel like it was particularly sinister for me.
Hmm.
And I thought they probably could launch 1,000 missiles, but I wasn't sure they could actually hit what they were aiming at that time.
Hmm. Yeah.
And so I had huge buckets of goodwill and hope. And that lasted through until, I'm going to say, the Metchel incident. I
What,
be I
which
began
one?
to
What?
I began to become disillusioned, but couldn't name it. Well, the Kursk incident with Putin staying at his vacation and refusing help. I sat there in coffee mania reading the Moscow Times, could not being able to believe that he wouldn't let us come help save these sailors, kind of thing.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Gotcha.
And
Yes.
then the Metchel incident, when he went out there and visited, and the guy, the oligarch was ill, and he said something like, "Well, if he thinks he's sick now, I'll really make him sick." And
Mm,
the stock price dropped, I don't know how many $1 billion overnight.
right.
Well, I kind of understood that what I thought was a great thing of him coming in and providing order probably was a different kind of order than I expected.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
then his performance in Munich kind of made me one notch further along in being a little queasy. And then I would say,
That would be 2005, right?
yeah,
Yeah.
yep.
Yeah.
So 2004, 2005, Metchel, and
Yeah.
then Munich, and then there was, let's call it, a pipeline of IPOs, and we were really busy, and it was so great.
Mm.
Despite this background music that was like, kind of like Phantom of the Opera organ in the scenes before the guy with the mask shows up. No, 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 no. That was in the background.
Yeah.
But in the foreground, we were still churning out IPOs and hiring people and growing and loving it. And I gave away the Russian practice to the partners. I did that
Uh-huh.
in 2004, 5, 6. I've got a globe. I went for the ceremony, literally, because the UK and US practices owned it. And we literally gave the balance sheet, handed it to the Russian partners,
Wow.
right?
Yeah.
And that was a sign of, we love you. It's yours. It's now your equity. We literally wrote it off and gave it to them.
Uh-huh.
Millions and millions and millions of dollars.
And how many partners were there?
At
Russian.
that point,
Yeah,
um,
Russian partners. Russian partners.
25, let's say,
25. Yeah.
30, 25, 30,
And these
2,000
these
people.
were people who had grown up through your organization and reached the level of becoming partners.
Yep.
And now you were giving them the
The equity, all the
yeah,
equity,
all the equity.
ownership.
Yeah, yeah. And but operationally, still EY controlled who was the managing partner and so on.
That's the governance
The
structure.
governance
Yes.
part, but the ownership and the huge value of the
We
practice
transferred it.
was
We gave it to them. We gave it
right.
to them. You know, there
Right.
was some, Carl was one of them. There were guys who were expats, but Russians, Sasha was one, so we gave it to them.
Yeah.
But shortly after that was 2008. And by then, 2007, I left EY. I moved there and became CEO of Kungor Oilfield Equipment and Services. And in 2008, of course, Lehman Brothers and the debt crisis. And a lot of the growth in Russia and a lot of the IPOs, if you recall, as a result of the decimation of the Soviet Union, a lot of these industries were disaggregated.
Mm-hmm.
You know, they were
Mm-hmm.
all kind of connected in various industries and they became disaggregated.
Right.
And a lot of people made a huge amount of money by reaggregating
Right.
and IPOing.
Uh,
Integra was the darling of the market. You know, it was a roll up of oil field services companies. It was a huge listing and it became a bust. And the EBRD bailed it out, right? But from 1999 until 2008, it was boom city,
mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah.
In 2008, the pipeline became a spigot.
Yeah.
And I think if I were going to tell you 3 or 4 major events that changed me from a man of, oh my God, this is wonderful, this could be the 51st state, right?
Right.
To when the light bulb switched, my events would be Metro, Kursk, Metro, Munich, debt crisis, um, um, and there was this strange gray cloud we lived in around Bill Browder, around Pussy Riot. Even before the Olympics, there was this feeling that I had sitting in my office at Brunswick Rail and feeling like we were inside a damp gray cloud.
Mm. This
And
was
that and
your
that and that never went away. It only changed colors and intensity.
mm-hmm.
But
Mm-hmm.
by 2013, I was aware that my hopes of 1992, 93 were dashed. And by the way, it takes 15 years to actually begin to learn the culture. And I learned the language only as a, 50-year-old guy.
Yeah.
So when you're learning the Russian language, you're learning more about culture, you're learning more about life. And until then, and even after it, some people, people have different reactions, right?
When did you start learning Russian? When?
I'll say really seriously 2007.
Okay.
Once I became CEO of Kungor Oilfield Materials and was the only English speaker among 3,000 people, I got the message.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I hired 3 teachers, one for the morning, one for lunch, and one for after.
Yeah.
3 different kinds of teachers, one old Soviet,
Right. Right.
one younger. She actually worked for BT and
Mm-hmm.
was married to this guy. Oh God, Stas Popov, the king of Latin dance of Russia, who's probably my age, but quite a guy,
Yeah.
and another young woman who was a bit troglodytic, but she, so I had three different kinds of teachers because I understood I had to do this,
Right.
right? But my point is that in the 90s, I was all in.
Yeah. Let me kind of summarize where I think we were and on the topic we were, and because I know we've had a break, sometimes you lose that train of thought. Um, we were discussing the impact of language and on your understanding of culture and how you worked there in the context of Russia, particularly when you started learning Russian. And if I understand you correctly, I'm going to summarize this, and you can tell me if I'm wrong. That from the time you started working there in the early '90s through about 2007, uh, most of your work was conducted in English, and you were in an English environment. And my guess is, as a result, pretty much lived within the confines of the expat community. I mean, the business associations, the restaurants, the kind of social life of the expat community that developed over the '90s and was really an English language primarily uh, community at that point. And then you began studying Russian when you were in an environment in which you were the only non-Russian speaker, and you started telling me about how that changed things for you. So, first of all, am I correct about the beginning?
No,
No.
no. So no, not really. So, like everybody else who came there, you self-teach a certain degree of Russian. And we had, so Chernaya Sabaka, I mean, the
Right.
first words you learn, Доброе утро, Добрый вечер, so you begin to learn Russian. You
Right.
can't help it,
Yeah.
right? You can't help it. You can't be there in the 90s and get in a cab and not know how to tell people where to go.
Mm-hmm.
So, like every other person who came, I self-taught myself. I had a dictionary. I tried my best. I was always trying. That's number one. And we had jokes like pecto pa. You know what I mean by that?
Yes, the restaurant.
Okay.
Yes,
Yeah.
that's
Okay. Yeah. So I mean,
that's the
so
standard foreigner
we
joke.
all went through this transliteration
Yes.
and learning the alphabet, and that's number one. Number two, even though there was a language barrier, there was no social barrier.
Mm-hmm.
And so I would take real exception about the community was very blended. Of course, there were expat things. I went to a Catholic church, the French church, that had an English service
Mm-hmm.
at 9 on Sunday, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, that's English, and I went there for a reason, right? But I would go to the Orthodox church up the street after that because it was so mystical, right? So there and the young Russians were all speaking English. And so there was a huge exchange of social behavior, and there were always Russians involved with us.
Mm-hmm.
We would have volleyball games out at Chaika, where this place was where we stayed in the 90s. And on the weekends, there were as many Russians as expats. And part of that was because all the expats were involved marrying Russian women, or, the other way around. Right. And so that started, it's like during a war, right? There's this exchange that can't be stopped. It's the same thing. In 2007, I understood I needed to formally learn Russian. Я понял.
Mm-hmm.
Да? Вы говорите по-русски, да?
Немного, я
Да.
как вы,
Я знал мой окончание и ударение был плохой. My pronunciation and my endings were terrible. And you can't really speak Russian. So, я не верблюд. Of course, I not camel. It means something different than я ж не верблюд. Right? One is I'm not a camel. The other is, hey, you fool, I'm not an idiot. Right? And or я чувствую холодно. Oh, I'm touching cold. No. Я чувствую холодно. Я чувствую себя холодно. Right? And unless you understand себя and je, the meaning is lost. So I understood I was missing meaning and I needed to formally learn. And that's why I dove in. But I wouldn't say I was ignorant before then. I would say I was one of those sloppy, self-taught people. So it just a slight difference.
Right. But did it also change your understanding of your environment the more you met?
So, of course, when you have a Sovietsky style, 60-year-old Russian teacher, she's going to whip out Pushkin and start making you read stuff.
Yeah.
Yes, of course. Sertse огонь в сердце. You don't understand the Russian soul and heart until you begin to learn the language, because you learn. And yes, I did.
Yeah. And it changed your perception of your environment?
Yes.
And can you elaborate on that?
Well, it put me. So there are so many ironies in the Russian culture and mentality. And I was aware of differences in behaviors, but you become more understanding of things the more language you learn. And so I became, while I felt these things before, you feel them, but don't really fully understand them. I'm not going to claim I fully understand, but I am pretty good at understanding Russia now. I thought I was pretty smart, but I wasn't. The transition began really around the Metro, Munich. That thing had impacts on my understanding of the differences in culture. What is this word solipsism? Probably I'm going to use it incorrectly, but there is this Western American illness of assuming that everybody's just like we are. And they're not. And I was a victim of that. You change when you submerge yourself in another culture. But I would say my transition into really undoing my solipsism began to occur in the early aughts. And I would say once I tried to seriously study the language, it was an accelerant in my getting rid of my solipsism and understanding that we're really different.
Yeah.
And this is one of the big problems today in our administration, in my view, if I can be political for a moment. I think that one of the biggest, if this is the right word, solipsists in the world is Donald Trump. And he doesn't get the subtle differences in mentalitat. And dealing with Russia, I think being a Russia hand, all these dudes who we read about from the past, I think they actually had the ability to differentiate this, understand this different in mentality. And I don't think a lot of Americans believe that if Mr. Putin left, everything would change. They
Right.
don't realize that Putin is a reflection of Russia, not the other way around.
Right.
Well, I started to understand that better in the aughts, and studying Russian made that transition accelerate.
Huh. Huh. And was that reflected then in how you understood the business environment as well?
Everything,
Yeah. Yeah.
everything.
Yeah. Yeah. So this is a kind of a body of knowledge that was built by expats who lived through this with a certain level of experience and view that is sort of not being utilized, I would say. Would you agree with that?
100%.
Yeah. 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 Yes. I think that, by the way, that's part of the reason to do this archive is to help preserve some of that for the future. But looking back, would it, if you had understood what you understood in 2007 in 1991 or two, would it have changed what you did or how you thought about what you were doing?
Absolutely. I'd
Yeah.
be a billionaire instead of what I am.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
I
Yeah.
would have left Ernst and Young and changed my life much more if I'd known then what I know now.
Hmm. Hmm.
I think the guys who studied Russian and were there as exchange students had a huge experience, and that's why they are who they are.
Yeah.
And those of us who were, I'm going to use a word in its proper meaning. Those of us who were retarded
Hmm.
in being not up to speed on understanding the language and the culture
Hmm.
we thought we did a great job. We created great businesses, but I think we did it without fully understanding what we were doing. We were kind of lucky.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
I think it's was a huge handicap that you overcome through time.
Hmm. Hmm. And did you at the time feel, and I'm saying I think that many people felt, that Russia was irreversibly integrated into the world economy as it was constituted under Western leadership at that time, that that was an irreversible process that we just assumed and assumed that it would continue in that way. Is that fair to say?
No,
Okay.
no, no. I could smell and feel the hope in the air in the
Mhm.
90s.
Yeah.
But very shortly, because of the problems I had to deal with,
Mhm.
which were different than maybe other people's problems, I understood it was different and there were problems. You couldn't, it was not a situation where you went into a tailor and just put on a new suit of clothes and walked out in that outfit and behaved differently. I understood there was a huge transformation that was necessary. I concluded, and maybe I'm not a good candidate for this video, but I concluded that one of the biggest problems we see now is the lack of a reconciliation at the time of the demise, or maybe it didn't die, of the Soviet Union,
Mhm.
that there was a failure in Russia among Russians. Of course, the chief blame goes to the leadership, but it goes through the entire society to reconcile itself with itself and with not just 100 years, but a little more of that.
Mhm.
And I think I think, yeah, I understood that before I fully understood Russia,
Mm,
that there had been a lack of take a Ribbentrop-Molotov,
right.
right? So Mr. Ribbentrop goes to Moscow, and it's on the front page of Pravda and Izvestia. The pictures are there,
Mm-hmm.
where he stayed, where he went. There's headlines when they reached their deal. They didn't show the map with the Stalin's line,
Right.
and then it was public. And then what's happening from 1939 to 1940, is that Russia's supplying everything. But what's not talked about much, and never in Russia, is the fact that in September, Mr. Hitler says to Mr. Stalin, "Wait a minute, you're supposed to be on the other side of this line of conflict in Poland. Come in here and take your stuff."
Mm-hmm.
And Mr. Stalin, goes and takes Bessarabia, half of Poland, all the Baltics, and he's not. I'm not a combatant, but I've invaded all these countries that were separate at the time,
Mm-hmm.
and just taken them over and start killing all the people, right? That's what happened.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But the denialism is part of Russian culture.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And then the Nazis invade. Oh, shock. And now we forget about this little treaty and the fact that we supplied this place and their submarines were in pens we provided, up by St. Petersburg, a little north,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Right.
We erased that.
Mm-hmm.
That didn't happen. Forget that. We are the heroes.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And then for 50 years, we forget about that treaty. Then Mr. Yeltsin comes in, and lo and behold, well, yeah, we fucked up. So for 9 years, we get truth. Well, yeah, I guess we did that. Well, then VV comes in, Vivek, and we now repaint that painting.
Mm-hmm.
It's a different Joe Stalin. He's not so bad now. And the magic of the Russian culture is that they adjust to the message of the day. So, yay, Mr. Ribbentrop. Boo, Nazis. We fucked up. Boo, Nazis. We just did what we had to do.
Mm-hmm.
And whether it was 180 million or 140 million now, they do what they're told when they're told.
Mm-hmm.
I think that society needs, I'm sorry, I don't know, you're probably Russian and you're maybe insulted at what I'm saying.
But I'm an American. My grandparents came from Ukraine in 1911. So no, we're
So I think this is one of the problems with the culture and society.
mm-hmm.
And there's never been a reconciliation about all of that.
Mm-hmm.
Still now.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah.
And I knew that before I started studying language. I understood that.
Mm-hmm.
And so in answer to your question, I understood this was a hurdle. This was a problem. It's why no deal ever went in a straight line.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
No deal.
Yeah.
It's why you bribe people for a doctor, even today.
Mm-hmm.
It's why you bribe to get your kid in a particular school, even today. Now, of course, we had a few people do that famously in the US, right? But they're in jail,
Mm-hmm.
right? We have corruption in the US. Corruption is a facilitator. Corruption is in life.
Mm-hmm.
But in Russian society, it's built in. in my role, in my job, I understood that was inconsistent with what I was supposed to be doing for public companies. And
Hmm.
I didn't have to wait to learn the language to figure that out.
Yeah, you experienced it from the beginning. I
Well,
remember.
I went through this romantic period and loved it and still love it and still love the people and still love the food and love the culture. I fight with my wife and fall with my brothers when they were alive. Doesn't mean I didn't love them,
Hmm.
but I recognized the issue and it was an inhibitor. And
Hmm.
now we're seeing what happened.
Hmm. Yeah, 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 yeah. Well, in terms of the interview, it seems like this is kind of a wrap up, if you will. I don't know if I've missed things that you wanted to talk about or experiences you wanted to include. And if I have, I don't want to cut that off. But and there's a couple other, and I do want to talk to you about the St. Petersburg after we stop this recording. But for purposes of this recording, are there topics I haven't touched on or experiences that you want recorded here as part of this record, if you will?
There are moments, and maybe I should summarize it rather than paint it, but there are moments of experience that are irreplaceable in my life. Um, Crazy, obscene, um, feeling my mother's presence, wishing she were watching me,
Hmm.
um, feeling and not understanding why I felt I belonged. Now my genealogical background is such that I understand some of them, but I didn't know it then.
You have roots in Russia?
So my mother was Jewish,
Hmm.
and I I knew that when I was in Russia, but I didn't understand the long road. And
Hmm.
now I do, and it goes back. So part of my ancestry, believe it or not, um, goes back to that area that's in that famous book. I think it's North South Street, East West Street, but this place that was part of the Russian Empire, it fought over and the guys who basically came up with um, genocide, those words that were used in the trial. They're from
Uh-huh.
my Jewish roots go back to that area that's
Okay.
part of the Russian Empire.
Hmm.
And this is amazing, but my father was Swedish. That's why the name is Swedish. And I got this 23andMe report of my ancient ancestors, which you can get if you pay the extra fee. And one of my ancestors was found as a skeleton from like 1000 AD near St. Petersburg, one of those Vikings,
Wow.
and so I believe in things like genetic DNA, memory kind of thing, that I think there is something to it.
Right.
And I never quite understood why I felt so comfortable at times. And
Uh-huh.
only in the last few years do I understand, I think, why.
Hmm.
And so I had experiences that were remarkable over the course of my time that changed me.
Hmm.
And I'm a different person and a better person, I think,
Hmm.
for my experience and for my Russian friends. I'll call them family.
Hmm.
My son went to the finance academy. Um, so Yeah, so I would just say that we left out a lot of the emotion and deep connection and why I wanted it to work so badly. I did want it to work. And right now it's not working. And I have great sadness.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's dangerous for the world right now that the two great nuclear powers are on opposite sides of major issues that are problematic. I think it's dangerous for the world.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we're a better match. I think we're better marriage material than the guys they're lined up with right now.
Mm-hmm.
So I feel great sadness for that. But I feel like my Russia experience was transformational in my life and would not change it for anything.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I would say.
Fantastic.